So it's time for the meeting, and you should all be aware that tonight this will be recorded. Tim Ruddick is there in charge of the recording, so don't say anything that preserved for posterity. That will go into the archives. So good evening and welcome everyone. We're really excited about, this is our kickoff, our first event of our 8-event schedule for America250. And here we at the Historical Society appointed a subcommittee of the Board of Trustees to plan these events. So this is the first one, our academic lecture. And we'll have a whole sequence of events, which includes other programs. It includes an ice cream social. It includes a trivia night at the Tin Cap. So we have a variety of programs that we are offering to the public in June and July, and then one final one in September. Because we at the Historical Society are reminding our community that what we are observing is the Declaration of Independence. We are observing the signing of a document that changed history. So welcome. So tonight's kickoff lecture is the Global Declaration of Independence. Another of our events is an art show, and it's right here in the room. Lauren Risk, who just came in, is a member of the committee, and she took responsibility for overseeing the art show and art contest. So these are works of art made by high school students here in Clinton County, and we ask them to consider the preamble of the Declaration and think about what life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness looks like to them. So we received quite a variety of responses. So take some time at the end of tonight's program to take a look. But the real event for the art show is Wednesday, July 1st, our ice cream social. So we'll be having the presentation of awards. We're providing 3 monetary awards for the top 3. These have been independently judged. We'll also have ice cream. We'll have a dramatic reading of the Declaration of Independence. We will have a Revolutionary War reenactor, and plenty of red, white, and blue ice cream, we hope. If progress hasn't run out before we get enough of it. So that's coming up on July 1st. That's our big event, our big public event that will be on the lawn outside and inside as well. And so invite your friends, bring your families. We hope that'll be a good community public event. Now, for tonight's lecture, we are thankful to the Genealogy Society for seeding their Monday night time to start our lecture series. We're thankful to Darlene Kastner for bringing the cookies, which we'll enjoy following the presentation. And we're thankful that Keith Orejel, who is a member of the Board of Trustees of the Historical Society, has agreed to be our opening lecturer. So his bio says that Keith Orejel is an associate professor of history at Wilmington College. He received his BA from the University of California, Berkeley, and his MA and PhD from Columbia University. He teaches a wide variety of subjects, including the American Revolution and the Civil War. He is currently finishing a book on rural and small-town politics since World War II, showing how large-scale economic transformations shaped the partisan allegiances and voting behavior of the American countryside. That should be an interesting conclusion. Were you studying us here in Wilmington? We went further afield so as not to get in trouble with your neighbors. So at Wilmington, Keith teaches both halves of the American History Survey and is currently developing future courses on topics such as U.S. agricultural history, the Black Freedom Movement, the age of Reagan, and American foreign policy since World War II. When not teaching, this native of Southern California Mojave Desert enjoys running, playing tennis, and walking his dog, Bingley. Thank you so much, Keith, for being here.
All right, well, thank you everyone for coming to this talk to jumpstart the America 250 celebrations, right? So today's talk is going to be sort of basically looking at the Declaration of Independence from like a different vantage point than I think most people have usually sort of encountered it, right? And so the talk is called the Global Declaration of Independence, and most of it, you know, as a historian, like to cite my sources, most of it is sort of drawn from this really great book by this historian, David Armitage, that basically looks at the Declaration of Independence as a sort of global history, right? And so if you were interested in the topic and wanted to read more about it, I would sort of highly recommend this document, right? And so what we're going to do today is sort of look at the Declaration of Independence, and not just how it was, of course, this critical document in the establishment of American nationhood and this sort of, you know, ringing rhetoric about sort of liberty and freedom, but also the way in which it played this really critical role in sort of creating our modern system of like international relations and global affairs. And it helped to kind of establish the template by which not only itself, but many other countries to come in later years would lay claims to sort of political independence and state sovereignty, right? And so this will be sort of the focus that we will look at today, right? So just to ask a question, who here from memory can recite part of the Declaration of Independence? Yeah. So what can you do?
Actually, I don't know.
We hold these truths.
Yes,
to be
exactly,
self-evident.
right? So this is the line that most people will call to memory, right? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? And a lot of people basically refer to this as the sort of Declaration of Rights part of the Declaration, right? So you have embedded within this a statement about basically this idea that all people basically have had bequeathed by nature upon them this set of rights that like governments can't really take away, right? That it's like a basic feature of their humanity and their sort of existence that they are endowed with these certain sort of privileges, right? And so this is obviously the most sort of memorable part of the document, right? But what's interesting is this portion makes up like a shockingly small part of the overall statement, right? And most of this document is not focused on rights and freedoms and liberties at all, right? Does anybody know where this part comes in?
Second paragraph.
It's a second paragraph, right? So it doesn't even necessarily open with this, right? It sort of is slid in, and then it sort of really sort of moves on, right? And so you have this as obviously these immortal words that are kind of remembered forever, but which to some extent were not like the main political purpose of the document itself at the time, right? And when was this document sort of formalized, right? So what is the date, of course, that we always celebrate that this document? 1776, exactly, right? When, though, did the war start?
1775.
Right. And this is one interesting dynamic that is often sort of overlooked, right? The war had been going on for more than a year. A year, right? Blood had already been shed in the small hamlets of Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts. There had been a severely bloody fight at Bunker Hill, right? And the fighting had continued on for well over 12 months. You had a long siege of Boston that eventually led for the British to sort of evacuate, and things were still sort of ramping up well into mid-1776, right? And so this is one sort of facet of this story that's kind of often overlooked, is that it took them more than a year, right, in which they were fighting and killing and dying to finally issue an affirmative statement that the goal of this war was independence, right? And that they were going to try to sort of separate themselves from basically the British Empire and become like a new nation, right? Why is that? Like, why did it take them so long to come to this conclusion, right? Well, one reason is a bunch of them just couldn't yet bear the break with Britain, right? Many of them had been born and raised as British men and women, and the thoughts of sort of leaving this political entity was just too much, right? They were too dedicated, they were sort of too committed, and so it took them a long time to sort of accept this reality, right? So you have things like what's known as the Olive Branch Petition. So well after sort of hostilities were sort of coming into development, right, they're still sort of reaching out to the king. And they're kind of making this statement that, like, you know, like, we think things have gone bad, and we know the relationship is sour, but there's still a lot of love, right? Like, there's still warm feelings from the good old days, right? Like, we still might be able to, like, repair this, right? Like, maybe we can come back together, right? And within the Continental Congress, there was a huge group of moderates, people like sort of John Dickinson, who basically were like, if we leave the British Empire, like, it could go really bad. Like, we could then break up into a million different tiny republics. We then could be preyed upon by, you know, France and Spain and all the other countries. Like, things could go really, really wrong. And they were really worried about sort of the ramifications of leaving the British Empire, right? So there's all these reasons why they didn't want to go. But another big part of the reason why it took them so long to issue this statement was that they didn't really even know how to do it, right? They had no idea what this would look like. No one had really ever made such a declaration, right? They were living in a world that was a world of empires, right? Much of the globe was organized around empires. And empires were kind of the dominant unit, right? You had the Russian Empire that covered vast swaths of Eurasia. You had the British Empire that covered, obviously, not only the eastern seaboard, but also many sort of colonies in the Caribbean. You had the Grand Spanish Empire that covered much of North and South America. You had the Portuguese in Brazil. You had the Ottoman Empire, right? And so this was a universe where it was sort of established that there are these grand empires, right? There are these huge territorial entities. They cover much of the globe. And as of this moment, right, there had not been any precedent. No European colony in North America or elsewhere had broken away from its imperial master, right? This had literally never happened. So they didn't even know, like, what does this even look like? How does one even go about claiming independence? Like, what is the process? Like, what is the sort of procedure? That was all completely undefined, right? And in many ways, the Declaration of Independence is itself the procedure that, like, sets the standard. It is the sort of model that then is going to sort of determine how it is that one sort of undergoes this process, right? When they were writing the Declaration, they had shockingly few precedents to look to. There was only a couple of other documents that they could even think of that kind of came close to what they were trying to do. One is what's known as this Declaration of Arbowith. So this is this sort of document where like the Scottish sort of king is like appealing to the Pope and is going like, oh, could you go to the English king and maybe get him to like negotiate so that we could like, sort of, have Robert the Bruce in charge instead of Edward the Longshanks. They're like, but the thing that they were really asking for was to trade one monarch for another, right? They wanted to trade basically sort of one ruling monarchical sovereign for another, and the only other one that people were really aware of is what's known as this Dutch Act of Abjuration, and where the Dutch were basically saying, like, we don't want to be under the yoke of the Spanish Bourbons anymore, right? We don't want to be controlled by Spain, right? But once again, the sort of thing they were asking for was like, we would like to replace the King of Spain with like the Duke of Anjou, right? So it was like a very bad set of examples to really try to establish like some kind of basis for saying like we want to do this, right? We want to sort of claim this new status and we want to sort of make this leap. And they really didn't have anything to model it after, right? They had to sort of create something from scratch that had in many ways just never been done before, right? But what happens is that after about a year, they realize they have to put something down on paper. There has to be some written statement, and the reason for that is that there are foreign countries demanding it, right? There are foreign countries that basically say, we kind of need you to sign on the dotted line, right? Ever since the fighting had been breaking out, the US had been like negotiating with foreign powers, right? They've been holding these talks with France and Spain. And they're going to France and Spain, and they're like, hey, like, you should help us, right? You should send us weapons, and you should send us money, and maybe use your ships and go attack all the other British colonies, so that will like distract them and make them busy. And we really think that this would be awesome. Like if you could do that, that would just be like great for us, right? And so they sent these delegations, right, led by folks like Benjamin Franklin, who has this very, like, he's like the toast of the town. The French just love him so much. He's this brilliant, scientist who discovered electricity and this philosopher and statesman. So they just think he's like super neat, right? And he sort of just like charms them all, right? But the French basically say to them, they're like, we can't give you any help until you make some sort of statement, right? Because at the end of the day, they're like, we're not going to send you money and weapons and aid if you're still going to go back to the British Empire. All we're going to be doing is helping the British, right? If we send all this aid and support you and then you rejoin the British Empire, like that's the worst case scenario for us. So they're like, you have to put down on paper that you're leaving the British Empire and you're never going back. We're not going to help you unless you do that. Because then, if you do that, we will be hurting the British Empire, who are enemies, right? So like, if you say, we're leaving, we're never coming back, like that way, we can then start sending you guns. We'll start sending you weapons, gunpowder, things like that. Because then we realize, like, this is going to hurt our enemy and benefit us, right? So this is sort of the moment where the sort of leaders of the United States have to make a decision, right? They basically have to make a statement that says we're leaving the British Empire, we're not returning in order to get help from these foreign countries, right? So that's sort of the motivation behind the Declaration of Independence, to essentially sort of proclaim your exit so as to sort of appeal to aid for these sort of foreign countries, right? And so in